There you go. 4-punch, 5-punch, 6-punch combination. Body shot, bang, 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 bang.
Telling him not to counterpunch.
Boom! Will Rackman get up? Reloading!
Iron. You're going through all the instructions. This is for the championship of the world. I expect a tough, clean fight. Protect yourself at all times.
Welcome back, fight fans. This is your host, Alden Chodash of the Fight City Podcast. I'm going to be joined by Zachary Alapi today, who exclusively covered the Four Aces card at Quebec City yesterday. Last night, we had Yves Ulysses with an impressive knockout over Mathieu Germain, and we had Steve Claggett on the undercard, impressive as well. So, where should we begin, Zach?
I mean, I think what's kind of interesting to talk about first is just like the format of the tournament a little bit, because it harks back to the Super Six super middleweight tournament, which we haven't seen in a while. You know, we've seen other kind of like round robin things, maybe a little bit, or informal round robins, but this one is like these guys are locked in for like a year in this tournament. And so you got four guys, they each fight each other once. And like the Super Six, you have that point system. So in their stoppage wins last night, Claggett and Ulysses earned 3 points for those victories. Germain, Theroux, obviously nothing. Decision would be 2 points, draw 1 point, so on and so forth. So they each fight each other once, it's required. And then the guy with the most points goes right to the final, and the two guys in the middle fight in the semifinal. The one with the least amount of points is the odd man out, and then the two guys fight in the semifinal bout to fight the top guy. So it's kind of interesting because, you know, like we've seen like the top rank bubble and things like that, and I guess like what people need to know about the Canadian fight scene, which is probably self-evident, is that there's not nearly as much money involved and resources, and the public health guidelines for stuff like this, especially with combat sports, have been very, very strict. And so I really like it because it forces some creative domestic matchmaking, which we don't get enough of in Canada, especially for divisions where we have more talent, like light heavyweight for whatever reason, and then junior welterweight, which is obviously this tournament. And so it's nice that we kind of get to see these fights that we've kind of, like, for those of us here, have been talking about for a while. Yeah. And the other thing too is that, like, I know, Alden, like, you're more familiar with Yves Ulysses. He's been on HBO. He's fought in the States a few times. He's had some good wins. But even him, like, none of these guys have really proven that they deserve to be serious contenders yet. Claggett and Ulysses have kind of flirted with it. So I feel like they're all kind of in this definitely outside top 15, even though some have like gotten some sanctioning body rankings at various points. So they kind of someone needs to emerge from this pack, right, to actually be a real contender. And so it makes sense to match all of them and just see who emerges as the best of the bunch, because realistically, I don't think all of them should get to that level, right?
But it's interesting, though, because most of these fighters have already fought each other at least once. Ulysses and Claggett have had 2 fights. They split 2 fights against each other. Of course, a lot of us are still excited about seeing a third fight between them, and I know Claggett has fought Germain, I believe, in the past as well. Aren't these guys a little eager of kind of getting out of this sphere and expanding their horizons into the domestic, well, when I say domestic, I mean the U.S., the United States fight scene?
Absolutely. I think, though, you kind of have to look at where they were right before the tournament started. So if we go kind of through them like one by one, Theroux, he was promoterless, so he just jumped at the opportunity because it was 3 guaranteed fights for solid money, and if he pulls an upset or two, who knows? He used to be with Eye of the Tiger when he was younger, then lost a couple of times, was released, so maybe he gets a contract again, right? Germain had the draw with Claggett, and then he had that upset stoppage loss to Uriel Perez, who we saw in DAZN a little while back getting knocked out in the first round by I forget who. So he was in big need of, like, kind of building himself back up. Ulysses, I mean, he laid a total egg against Ismael Barroso. I don't know if you saw that fight, but it was a really
it was a disappointing performance. A lot of inactivity in the middle rounds. It seemed like he gave that one away.
Totally. Just really passive. He tried to kind of fight this really cute, kind of technical fight, throwing one shot at a time and moving a lot. And He just totally got outworked. He was never hurt or in danger, but he just simply got outworked. So he was called out publicly by his promoter and didn't take too kindly to that, and doesn't really want to be in the tournament, but is kind of, I think, using that as motivation to maybe try to really run the table impressively. And Claggett just signed with Eye of the Tiger, and then he had an injury after his first fight with the promotional outfit. So he was kind of in a no man's land where he's one of those guys who's maddening to fight because his work rate is so high and he's got great stamina and a good chin. So, he kind of was in a position where, if he wins this thing, then they can, sort of shop him around for much, much bigger fights. So you're right. They have fought each other in various combinations, but in some ways, none of them had a choice, especially we can't really bring opponents into Canada because of travel restrictions. And this is the only one who had any sort of like co-promotional pact, with Golden Boy.
With Golden Boy. Yeah, so, that was what I was going to ask next is, given his co-promotional pact, did he not feel at liberty to explore some of Golden Boy's options? I really view a guy like Ulysses as a guy who's just asking to score an upset at some point. I mean, he has all the ability, and it looks like he's able to turn it on any particular night. Consistency is where he might fall short, though.
I agree. I mean, I think with him, the problem was just the Barroso fight, really. Like, he was sort of being led in that direction, and if he had won that fight, and especially if he looked good, there's no way we'd be talking about him in this tournament. So I'm not privy to what kind of discussions went on with Golden Boy after that, but I think the fact that he's ended up in this tournament, and Camilo Estefan and Eye of the Tiger, they have a very close relationship with Golden Boy, through David Lemieux, right? Yeah. So what I imagine is Golden Boy is like, well, if we're gonna like actually invest in trying to get this guy a big fight in the States, like, you got to do something with him after this like lame duck of a performance. I can't say for sure, but it seems likely.
Yeah, I mean, getting a string of victories against Claggett and against Thoreau, etc. I mean, it's names on the record.
Exactly,
it's getting a streak going.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is that, obviously a lot can go wrong with tournament formats like this, but let's assume for a second it doesn't. It keeps him active, for a year. You're getting 4 or 5 fights depending on your path to the final, right? And I can't see him not making the final, to be honest with you. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you're right. I think he's got a style that could give a lot of guys problems if he switched on. And I guess it's a good segue into the actual fights from last night, because it was really interesting, because in the Francophone media, this isn't exactly a favorite. He's very mercurial. He doesn't like to give interviews. A lot of people find his attitude comes off as like dismissive and stuff. And I was shocked, frankly, at how many were picking Germain to win. It was really, really surprising. And I think, that definitely served as motivation for him. So basically what happened in the fight was, Ulysses missed a press conference earlier in the week. Germain had some words that were, not exactly kind in his direction. And I think there's been some bad blood brewing between these guys for a little while now. They've known each other for a long, long time. And the first 5 rounds were entertaining, but they kind of had the vibe of a very more of like an intense sparring session where you just kind of felt like he was trash talking him. He was just kind of like showing that he couldn't really do anything, as opposed to turning it up, his own offense. But he was much more active and coming forward at the same time. Then in the 6th round, he just decided to switch gears. And that's the thing we'd kind of been wondering about with him is he boxes well, but sometimes he just does enough to win rounds instead of really going for that impressive finish. And once he changed gears in the 6th, I mean, the separation was impressive. He started to back Germain up even more, really unload the combinations, throw harder punches, sit down on his shots more. In the 7th, he knocked him down with a really nice combination, started by a right hook. Put him down for a second time. Germain looked like he'd hurt his leg a little bit on the second knockdown, but I mean, it was over from that point, Yeah,
I'm looking through his box rec, and this is the first stoppage he scored since 2017 against Zachary. So, certainly a way to get on the map is to score highlight reel knockouts. Hopefully more of these get televised to the mainstream boxing public. I've yet to see his fight on YouTube. I'm hoping to.
Yeah. That's the thing, because it was such an impressive performance and like a really just dynamic stoppage that it would be good to get that out there. That's definitely part of the process of building a guy like him back up, because I think that, a lot of pundits or like, people, matchmakers and stuff in America, like, why not write him off after that Barroso loss, right? Like, he's from Canada. He's got like a kind of slick defensive style. Like, why would you want to have anything to do with him, after a performance like that? So they need to use this as a springboard for sure. And I mean, the other thing too is that, they were actually trash talking after the fight too. Like, he was not smiling even after the win. Like, there's a big chip on his shoulder. I don't think he's happy with his promoter. He's definitely not happy with the media. He's here to like seek and destroy. But I think in terms of like his progression as a fighter, that's actually a good thing, because this with a mean streak, that's kind of the one thing that's been missing. And I don't know if you'd heard about this, but he's now training with John Scully down in Hartford. Who wasn't able to actually be in his corner for the fight because of the
travel restrictions.
Travel restrictions, and he would have had to quarantine for 14 days before and after, and he could not do that.
He's got a business
to other fighters, and stuff in his business, right? But this had been down there for a couple of months, and Scully had gotten him great sparring. And this, he was on the Canadian national team for a while. He fought at 2 World Amateur Championships. He's fought a lot of, good fighters and been in a lot of good gyms. But I think he really needed this. He needed to like go to gyms in the States where no one like knew him or respected him, and just kind of go through the gauntlet in places like that. And he said, in the few interviews that he did give, that it was really what he needed, in terms of he was treated like absolute shit by the other fighters in the gyms he was in until he made them respect him.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see, like, and that's the thing Scully was talking about. He's like, I don't need to correct anything technically with Yves. I don't need to teach him anything as a boxer. It's all mental with him. And
gotta get that killer instinct out.
Exactly.
I could see that.
So this was a good start for that. So it shows that partnership, even with Scully not being able to be there, might be exactly what this guy needs.
And being 32, he's getting towards that age where it's kind of fight or flight. He's got to make a move and force his way into the main picture sooner than later.
Exactly. He's an interesting case too, because he only started boxing around like 19 or 20 and was on the Canadian team till I think 25 or 26. So turned pro a bit later.
Yeah.
Doesn't have as much mileage on him, but still, like for a guy who relies on his movement and reflexes, like, now's the time to make that big move. And actually, with Ulysses' performance, it was kind of making me think of another Canadian guy who was on the big stage finally, as Custio Clayton. I don't know if you saw this fight with Lipinets, but
he really emerged in that fight.
Yeah. Victory. In the sort of post Pascal Lucien Boutte era, Ulysses and Clayton were the two guys from our amateur system who we thought, these are the guys who are talented enough to like at least fight for a world title at some point. Yeah. And it took them kind of longer to get there for various reasons. With Clayton, I think it was more like mismanagement and some promotional issues. Ulysses kind of got some of those opportunities earlier, and with Barroso like dropped the ball, and then Clayton finally got it and did very well. And I think could have done even better if he maybe trusted himself a little more in the early rounds, even though I still thought he won the fight in a close fight. But the point I'm trying to make is that, like, if Ulysses doesn't get to the level that we just saw Clayton at, his career will have been a disappointment by our standards, because we feel the talent is there. And so it was good to see Clayton do so well, and I still feel like Ulysses can do it, and winning this tournament, I think will put him in position to get the kind of fight Clayton got, a month and a half ago or whatever it was.
So he's locked in until how many months, how many years?
I mean, so this is the thing. Like, they want to try to do the tournament in a pretty
brisk manner, I hope.
Brisk manner. Like, within 12 months, they want the whole thing to be over, and that would be like 4 to 5 fights, depending. So like we're talking about a card every 2 to 3 months.
It's activity.
Yeah.
It's activity that a lot of guys, unless they're hooked up with the right promotional network and organization, aren't getting.
And I think the good thing about it is that it's activity against at least like respectable opposition, especially Claggett. Like if we get 2 Claggett Ulysses fights, like let's say either guy wins both of those, I mean that's like a good statement that shows that you're a contender,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean it's unclear exactly when the next card's going to be scheduled. Obviously we got to see like what happens with COVID, because that could change everything, right? But assuming they're allowed to keep holding these cards, because I know Public Health's been pretty impressed with how Eye of the Tiger's done things. Hopefully, I'm hoping like February or early March at least we'll see the next one, and sort of take it from there. But in the co-feature there, Claggett,
Steve Claggett versus David Thoreau.
Put on a great fight. I mean, the way this one sort of looked to me is, Thoreau hasn't been as active or had the same kind of caliber of opposition recently, by virtue of not having a promoter. He came out and sort of blew his load in the first 4 rounds trying to hurt Claggett. He knew that they fight similar style, very aggressive, like to brawl on the inside, but I think he knew that over 10 rounds he wouldn't be able to keep the pace. So he just went for broke early, and I'd say it was an even fight through 4 rounds. Then Claggett started to take over in the 5th, and then just totally dominated the 6th round, had Thoreau pinned in a corner for most of it, hurt him with a couple of body shots, and you could just see Thoreau, his output dropped by like 80% within the space of a round and a half. Was taking some big shots, still on his feet, but I think knowing the tournament format, the corner opted to pull him out, save him from a lot of punishment, knowing that he has a couple of opportunities, and one win probably puts him in a semifinal fight. So I think it was good in that sense, but Claggett looked really impressive. I mean, he's always been one of those guys who has like a 80 to 100 punches around kind of work rate, always coming forward, very good at cutting off the ring, aggressive, takes a really good punch, and just never stops. Kind of master at forcing guys to fight his fight. And that's exactly what we saw here. Not that Thoreau had to be convinced, too much to fight that kind of fight. But he's done the same with Germain and Ulysses and all the times they've fought. And those guys like to box and move a lot more. But against Claggett, they've been forced to stand their ground and just throw a lot more punches than they're typically used to throwing. So I kind of view Claggett as the most consistent fighter in the field. And I hesitate to say like the outright favorite, but with Ulysses, the wild card, right? Because you don't know which version of him is going to show up. I think the version of Ulysses from last night would be the favorite, but in Ulysses who's a little more passive, he's, Claggett's like a perfect foil for him, so I see them as making the finals. But if this really aggressive kind of nasty Ulysses shows up, he's never been able to really separate himself from Claggett in 2 fights. They've both been close. I think we could maybe see him separate himself from Claggett if he brings this kind of nasty into their next fight.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we get a definitive finale to their trilogy. It'll probably turn into a quadrilogy.
Yeah.
But hoping for some more great fights. Speaking of which, I'll bring your attention to 2 of the biggest fights for December. Recently, Canelo Alvarez has made his fight against Callum-Smith official, but in a couple weeks from now, we have Danny Garcia and Earl Spence fighting in the AT&T Arena. A lot of big fights in Texas in December. Bigger stadiums, opportunity to get crowds, and meanwhile, Top Rank is stuck in the bubble.
Yeah, what's the rule with crowds in Texas right now, Alden?
Well, I know in amateur boxing it's 20% maximum capacity. I'm not sure if they follow anything similar in the professional realm. Okay. But, when you have these huge arenas, the Alamo Dome in San Antonio for Canelo-Smith, got the AT&T Center, you got some room to play with in terms of social distancing. So, some of these names could capitalize on box office attractions and gain a little more revenue that way.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's interesting because that's the one thing that with the fights we were just talking about, based on where they were held, like we would have expected kind of nice gates of 5,000-6,000 people, which, for like a non-title fight in Canada is pretty good. And so losing out on that is really unfortunate. But I guess it's nice that we're able to get that to an extent. As hopefully it can be done. It continues to be done relatively safely. I guess I don't know how it's been going with the bigger crowds in the States, to be honest. But at sporting events at least. But yeah, because with some of these big fights, you need that live gate, right, to realistically make it happen.
Yeah, or else some guys just they're just leaving too much money on the table, unfortunately. But in terms of predictions, how do you see the Errol Spence and Danny Garcia fight going down?
Oh man, I mean, with Spence, it's this will obviously be his first fight after the car accident.
Huge
right?
wild card there,
and that's the big wild card. I think I like Spence to win. I like Spence to win a decision, but at the same time, I mean, it's just we just can't really know how that's actually impacted it.
We don't know how his reflexes are going to be since then. We don't know how he takes punches. Since then, I mean, I hope not, but we could be looking at a very different fighter. And Danny Garcia is a test for him, even at 100%. He's a consummate professional, very good fighter. And if there is something lacking in Errol Spence come December 5th, I think Garcia might exploit that.
I agree. I mean, I think that to me, if we didn't have that variable to consider, my pick would be Spence by unanimous decision.
Yeah.
I think he'd kind of start to rough him up, get on the inside, really work the body, make him uncomfortable. I assume I'm gonna assume that he can still do that, but I think actually. Sort of, if I was going to make a safer bet, I could almost see a split or majority decision.
Yeah,
just
kind of see that. If his reflexes aren't there, I mean, Spence is not the fastest guy in the world at his best. He's extremely well schooled, extremely strong, but Danny Garcia might be able to find plenty of openings if there's some kinks in his armor since the accident.
I wonder too if the way Spence loves to go to the body, if those reflexes are have been damaged by the accident, if Garcia can really maybe catch him upstairs with one of those dynamite counter left hooks that he's so good at throwing, and maybe even hurt him. That's something I would worry about from Spence's on Spence's end. But
yeah, I mean, serious dental work was done, earlier this year, which feels like forever ago. But he was slurring his speech in certain interviews that was raising a lot of alarms. He's been relatively quiet in the pre-fight. This fight, you think in normal circumstances we'd be hearing plenty of trash talk from both sides, but it's been a pretty modest build-up to a pay-per-view event. I know a lot of diehard fans are going to buy it, like myself, and I'm sure plenty of more casual fans will as well. But I was expecting, a little more fireworks in the build-up to this fight.
Yeah, same. It really has flown under the radar in many respects. It's when you brought it up, when you brought up Canelo, I was like, oh yeah, of course I heard the news recently. Yeah. It had actually just completely slipped my mind that Spence-Garcia was coming up until you mentioned it, which is kind of strange. But I don't know. In some ways, I feel like we know what we can get from Garcia, right? And with Spence being such a wild card, it's I almost hesitate to pick him even. Yeah, I don't know. Where do you fall with that? How much stock are you putting in that wild card aspect versus what Spence can do or has done in the past?
I've kind of given up on predicting fights ever since a series of humiliating predictions this year post-COVID. There's just so many factors that could impact this fight one way or another. I mean, he's been inactive, more so than Danny Garcia. He's been inactive, plus the horrendous injury might introduce some new weaknesses. He's not the quickest fighter in the world at his best. I think Danny Garcia's hand speed and experience might have given him some problems at his best to begin with. I mean, Danny Garcia is a guy that could have easily, he was a round or two of being able to defeat Keith Thurman and Sean Porter, both two naturally much bigger guys than him. I mean, Danny Garcia started at 140. Sean Porter was an amateur at 165. Keith Thurman at 152. These are big power punching welterweights, and he held his own with both of them. Both beat him via close decisions. Danny Garcia is one of the best welterweights in the world. This is going to be a test, and if Errol Spence could pass it with flying colors, I think everybody's going to be screaming for the fight with Terrence Crawford. Terrence Crawford might be a free agent as early as October 2021. A lot of interesting things can happen. A lot of people kind of forgot about Spence versus Crawford for a while. I mean, it just became such a dull reality that these two promotional parties aren't going to be able to work together to make this fight that, people kind of gave up on it and moved on to other fights like Teofimo Lopez and Vasily Lomachenko, for example. But, this fight might be live again. Terrence Crawford just pulled off a great performance, and we'll see what Errol Spence has right now. I hope he has enough left to finally give the fans what they want. And one of the big fights to make, probably the biggest fight that you can make in this point in the game.
I mean, it's interesting, right? Because we can't just kind of take anything for granted here. And I think that the fight, first and foremost, is to prove that Errol Spence still has it. And I only say that because of what he went through physically.
It's a scary litmus test because Danny Garcia is a excellent fighter, and you got to consider that Errol Spence, at his best and his career best performance, just squeaked by Sean Porter, won a split decision.
Yeah, exactly. And stylistically, there's so many differences, obviously, between Garcia and Porter, but with Porter, it's like he's so aggressive and he's very effective with that. Oftentimes, will kind of like can smother a lot of his own work. I would just wonder, like, with Garcia's precision and the ability to throw like some really like crisp and clean like 1-2s, 1-2-3s with that big left hook. Like you said, if Spence is just a split second late with those reactions, like, he could be in a lot of trouble.
It's going to be a very interesting fight, a lot more interesting than Tyson Jones next week. Hoping no one gets hurt there. But let's close out with the Canelo-Callum-Smith fight. This is a matchup that I was craving for right after Callum Smith destroyed Hassan Nadan and Jikum. Smith looked like fire in that fight. He was dynamite. And then ever since he fought John Ryder, the flame kind of dwindled, and people really stopped thinking about this fight as much. I'm predicting a Canelo victory. He's giving up some significant height and range to Callum Smith, but he's been able to close the gap against guys like Sergey Kovalev, who I think are more more adept at using their size and distance to their advantage than Callum Smith right now. I mean, I saw Callum Smith giving up distance against John Ryder when he really shouldn't have been. Maybe to some extent that was because of the southpaw element that John Ryder introduced to Callum Smith. I mean, some guys just aren't good at fighting southpaws, but the man that I saw in there against John Ryder, I would not give a great shot against Canelo Alvarez.
Yeah, same. I mean, I'm happy the fight's happening because just in terms of titles, stakes on the line, like rankings at super middleweight, like these are the kind of fights that I want to see Canelo in, especially if he has like more room now to pick and choose opposition.
Well, it's crazy because he was trying to get the fight with Callum Smith and DAZN and Golden Boy were in the way of that apparently, and now he's a free agent, and this is his first fight within days of divorcing himself. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, so that's good in and of itself. I mean, in terms of how they match up, Callum Smith has a lot of torso for Canelo to bang. I think that the John Ryder fight, if anything, it showed that maybe Smith is his kryptonite might be guys who are that compact, and Canelo's a way better boxer, obviously, than John Ryder is. Not taking anything away from Ryder, I think he proved a lot in that fight, but I just think that after seeing that, Canelo being as smart as he is with that great upper body movement, great throwing combinations and picking his shots too, especially to the body. I mean, I see it being kind of like the thing that intrigues me about this fight is just to watch how Canelo eventually is going to break him down, because that's the way I see it going. I see kind of like a late-ish round stoppage,
similar to what he did to his brother.
Yeah. There you go, exactly. And
that's an interesting narrative, though. I mean, Callum will be fighting to avenge his brother, and Callum has some explosive punching power. I mean, if you watch his fight against George Groves, some of those punches just came out of left field and just had Groves on Queer Street ready to go right off the contact.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think the thing that we know about Canelo, great as he is that, no matter who he's fighting, you can see guys have some success early, like hit him. He's got such a great chin, right? But, like Amir Khan hit him flush early. Obviously, Golovkin's, was much better regarded fighter than Khan when they fought. But you know what I mean? Like he you can get to him. You can get to Canelo. He's just so good at like taking punches and standing his ground and firing back that I wouldn't be surprised to see Smith have some success early with that range.
Yeah.
But I think Canelo is just going to figure him out and figure out how to get the fight at the distance that he wants eventually. And he hits so hard that's going to start to take its toll. And he's more than smart enough to know that he's got to dig to that body against a guy like Smith.
Yeah. And a victory against Smith would give him a legitimate title at 168, set him up for plenty of other big fights at 168, a lot more fights that he has access to. I mean, the fight with Caleb Plant was being discussed before the Smith fight was finalized.
Yeah.
He can fight David Benavidez if he can still make 168. Plenty of other fights that he's open to now that he is a free agent.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he'll make another appearance at 175?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean,
maybe against a Dimitri Bivol.
Honestly, like I think I could see that at some point. I think that Canelo is smart enough to not pursue someone like an Artur Beterbiev at 175.
Yeah, and Bivol has been on record saying he could still make 168.
Exactly. I could totally see that fight happening, especially for a light heavyweight title, because historically it would have it would be yet another feather in Canelo's cap, having had that win over Sergey Kovalev, and Bivol not being like the biggest light heavyweight. It makes a lot of sense. I'm excited for this phase of Canelo's career because to have that freedom, I mean, he's clearly established himself as the cash cow in all boxing and its biggest star. You want him to be in the position where he can, jump around between networks, take the best fights, fight the best guys. I'm excited for it. I think Bivol would fit right into that kind of plan in the next year or two.
Yeah. We need to see Bivol again as well.
Yeah. Also, with Bivol, one of those things I was seeing, a lot of people are saying that some of those wins he had, the shutout of Joe Smith and the shutout of Jean Pascal are aging a lot better now.
Based on
recent performances from both those guys. So, I think that Bivol, people were very high on him. Then sort of he lost his luster a bit after some of those fights. But I think we need to remember that he's a very, very, very good fighter.
Yeah, technically. One of the best. Him against Canelo would be a tremendous fight.
Absolutely.
But that wraps it up for this episode of the Fight City podcast. Thanks so much, Zach, for joining us today. I hope everyone a happy Thanksgiving, and I encourage everyone to check out thefightcity.com for great updates and stories on the fight game.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Alden. It was fun.